The courtroom in Jacksonville fell into a hushed stillness as the 14-year-old boy turned slowly in his seat, locking eyes with the juror. With a deliberate, chilling smirk, he pursed his lips and blew them a kiss, a gesture dripping with defiance, as if the weight of his actions meant more. He was accused of ending his grandmother's life in a moment of cold calculation, believing his youth would shield him from any real consequence. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, a ripple of shock spreading through the room. But deep down, he didn't realize that justice was already closing in, ready to deliver a response he could never mock. Stories like this remind us that justice always finds its way. If you believe in accountability, subscribe now and tell us what you think below. This is how it all began. Margaret Whitmore was a kind-hearted grandmother living a peaceful life in a quiet Jacksonville neighborhood. She had raised her family with love and patience, always ready with a warm smile and homemade treats. Her grandson, Caleb, had come to stay with her, hoping for a fresh start amid some troubles at home. But beneath the surface, tensions were building. Caleb's growing obsession with video games led to arguments, especially when Margaret gently refused his requests for money. Little did she know that refusal would spark a tragic chain of events that night, forever changing everything. The silence in the Duval County courtroom was so complete you could hear the soft creak of wooden benches and the faint rustle of legal pads. Then Caleb Whitmore, 14 years old, pivoted in his chair. He looked straight at the 12 strangers who would decide his fate and, with slow, theatrical precision, blew them a kiss. His lips curved into that now infamous half-smirk, the kind that says, "I'm still in control here." Several jurors visibly recoiled. One older woman pressed her hand to her chest as though the gesture had physically struck her. Behind the defense table, Caleb's mother buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that had become a familiar soundtrack these past months. Across the aisle, Margaret Whitmore's daughter stared at the boy, who used to call her Aunt Lisa, her expression caught somewhere between grief and disbelief. The boy they once knew as a lanky kid who loved Fortnite and asked for seconds on peach cobbler now sat cuffed and orange jumpsuited, irradiating a confidence that felt almost otherworldly. Judge Eleanor Hargrove watched the entire performance from the elevated bench without blinking. Her face remained composed, but those who knew her well recognized the subtle tightening at the corners of her mouth, a signal that patience had just run out. She had presided over hundreds of juvenile cases, seen remorse, seen denial, seen tears that were real and tears that were rehearsed. She had never seen a defendant treat 12 fellow citizens like an audience at a comedy club. The prosecution had already laid out the core allegation in opening statements earlier that morning. Caleb had taken a .38 revolver from his late grandfather's nightstand drawer, walked into the kitchen where his grandmother was rolling dough for Sunday cobbler, and fired twice. Margaret had raised one arm in a futile attempt to shield herself. One bullet struck her shoulder, the second entered her chest. She collapsed beside the refrigerator she had magnet-covered with family photos. 6 minutes later, someone used her unlocked phone to transfer $1,200 into an account Caleb controlled. He believed the plan was flawless. Delete the texts, wipe the gun with bleach-soaked paper towels, slip out the back door while the neighborhood slept, text a friend an alibi, collect the money, buy the gaming console he'd been obsessing over, and move on. Youth, he seemed convinced, was the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. But one small device had other ideas. A neighbor 3 houses down had installed a Ring doorbell camera the previous Christmas. At 9:42 p.m. that night, the camera recorded a hooded figure leaving Margaret's side gate. The figure paused, glanced over one shoulder, then adjusted the straps of a backpack that appeared noticeably heavier than when he'd arrived earlier. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the height, the gait, the brand of sneakers visible in the porch light, all of it matched. Forensic analysts would later enhance that single frame until Caleb's partial face became unmistakable under the street lamp flicker. One still image. One moment of carelessness, and the first thread in a net he never saw being woven. Back in the present, the bailiff stepped forward at the judge's quiet nod. He placed himself between Caleb and the jury box, blocking the boy's line of sight. Caleb leaned back, still smiling faintly, as though the interruption were merely a minor inconvenience. Judge Hargrove let the silence stretch another 3 heartbeats before she spoke. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had long ago stopped needing to raise it. "Mr. Whitmore, you will face forward. You will not turn toward the jury again. Any further gestures directed at them will result in your immediate removal from this courtroom for the remainder of these proceedings." Caleb's smirk flickered just for a second, then returned, smaller, tighter, but still there. The judge leaned forward slightly. "And let me be very clear. This is not a performance space. This is a court of law. The people seated behind you are not your audience. They are the 12 citizens who now hold your future in their hands." She paused, letting each word settle. "You would do well to remember that." Across the room, Margaret's daughter reached for her sister's hand. Their fingers laced together so tightly the knuckles turned white. Outside the heavy double doors, reporters crowded the hallway, phones already recording reaction shots for the evening news. Inside, the gavel rested beside Judge Hargrove's right hand, polished oak, waiting. Caleb shifted in his seat, cuffs clinking softly. The smirk held, but something new flickered in his eyes. For the first time since the night he walked out of his grandmother's house with a heavy backpack and $1,200 in digital cash, he looked uncertain. The courtroom clock ticked forward, and somewhere in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and held breath, the machinery of justice continued its slow, relentless turn. Margaret Whitmore had always been the steady anchor in her family, the one who remembered birthdays with handwritten cards and kept photo albums updated with every milestone. For 32 years, she worked as a librarian at Oak Ridge Middle School in Jacksonville, guiding young minds through shelves of adventures and facts. Students from decades ago still sent her holiday notes, recalling how she'd recommend just the right book to spark their imagination. She was patient, precise, and endlessly kind, the sort of person who labeled her spice jars in neat cursive and paid her bills a week early to avoid any worry. Her home in the Arlington district reflected that same gentle order, a cozy bungalow with wind chimes tinkling on the porch and a garden where she grew tomatoes and herbs in raised beds. The neighborhood was a pocket of calm suburbia, on where kids rode bikes until dusk and neighbors waved from lawn chairs. No one locked their cars overnight, and Margaret often left her back door unlatched, trusting the world around her. Violent incidents were rare. The last notable trouble had been a minor car break-in over a decade ago. She felt safe, surrounded by familiar faces and the soft hum of everyday life. 6 months before that fateful night, Margaret welcomed her grandson Caleb into her home. His parents, her daughter Lisa, and son-in-law Mark, had suggested it as a temporary arrangement. Caleb had been facing challenges at school, skipping classes, small thefts from lockers, and a suspension for using vaping devices in the bathroom. They hoped a change of scenery and Margaret's steady influence would help him straighten out. "He's a good boy at heart," Margaret told her friends over coffee. "He just needs a little more structure and love to guide him." At first, things seemed promising. Caleb helped with yard work, mowing the lawn on Saturdays and carrying groceries from the car. Margaret baked his favorite treats, like oatmeal cookies with extra raisins, and they watched old movies together on quiet evenings. She enrolled him in a nearby school, drove him to classes, and encouraged him to join the chess club. But beneath the surface, small tensions began to build. Caleb spent more and more time in his room, glued to his phone or computer, immersed in online worlds where victories came quick and consequences were reset with a button. His obsession with gaming grew like a quiet storm. He talked endlessly about a new console that cost nearly $900, complete with high-end graphics and endless virtual realms. Margaret listened patiently, but held firm when he asked for the money. "You can earn it, sweetheart," she'd say with a soft smile. "Maybe a part-time job after school or saving your allowance." She believed in teaching responsibility, drawing from her own life of hard work and careful saving. Caleb nodded along, but his frustration simmered unspoken. One evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, Margaret noticed him staring at her phone on the counter. She kept it without a passcode, trusting those around her. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, Caleb sent a message to a friend from his own device. "She'll regret saying no." It was a fleeting vent, untyped in the heat of annoyance, but it lingered in the digital ether like a shadow waiting to lengthen. Margaret's trust was her greatest strength, and ultimately her vulnerability. She saw the best in people, especially family, refusing to believe that a boy she'd bounced on her knee could harbor darker impulses. Neighbors later recalled her waving from the porch, Caleb at her side, looking every bit the doting grandmother. "He's turning a corner," she'd say proudly. But in the quiet moments, when the house settled into night, that trust began to fray at the edges, unseen and unaddressed. As the weeks turned to months, the neighborhood's peaceful rhythm continued, sprinklers hissing in the mornings, dogs barking at mail carriers. Margaret kept her peppermint jar by the front door, and offering candies to visitors with a warm invitation to chat. She had no inkling that her open heart would soon become the prosecution's most poignant thread in the tapestry of betrayal unfolding far from her sunlit kitchen. In the end, that empty jar would stand as a silent witness on the counter, a small relic of a life built on kindness, now overshadowed by choices she could never have foreseen. The evening of October 15th unfolded like any other in Margaret Whitmore's quiet Arlington home. Golden hour light slanted through the kitchen windows, casting warm shadows on the counter, where she hummed softly while preparing her famous peach cobbler. Flour dusted her hands as she rolled out dough, the scent of cinnamon and fresh fruit filling the air. It was a ritual she cherished, and a way to unwind after a day of tending her garden and chatting with neighbors over fences. Caleb had been in his room most of the afternoon, the faint sounds of his gaming headset leaking through the closed door. Shouts of victory, frustrated mutters. She smiled to herself, thinking a slice of warm dessert might brighten his mood. Around 8:30 p.m., Margaret called out that dinner was ready. Simple chicken and rice, his favorite. Caleb emerged, phone in hand, slouching into his chair with minimal conversation. They ate in relative quiet, her asking about school, him giving one-word answers. The tension from earlier arguments about money hung unspoken, but Margaret chose kindness, offering seconds and steering talk to lighter topics like weekend plans. After clearing plates, she returned to her baking while he retreated back to his room. The house settled into its familiar rhythm, wind chimes tinkling outside as dusk deepened into night. At precisely 9:31 p.m., the peace shattered. Two sharp reports echoed through the bungalow, crisp, unmistakable pops that a neighbor later likened to misplaced fireworks in the off-season. Inside the kitchen, gunpowder's acrid tang mingled with the sweet aroma of half-baked cobbler, creating a surreal haze. Margaret lay crumpled near the refrigerator, her apron still tied neatly, one hand outstretched as if reaching for support. Defensive marks bruised her forearm where she'd instinctively raised it. The first shot had grazed her shoulder, the second piercing her chest with fatal precision. Blood pooled slowly on the linoleum, seeping toward a scattered rolling pin. The weapon was a .38 revolver, and an old family heirloom registered to Margaret's late husband, kept unloaded in a hallway drawer for sentimental reasons. Caleb knew its location well. He'd asked about it once during a curious phase, and Margaret had shown him, emphasizing it was not a toy. Investigators would later determine no signs of forced entry, no jimmied locks, no shattered glass. The scene suggested familiarity, not intrusion. Her purse lay nearby, contents lightly disturbed as if searched hastily, but nothing valuable missing beyond what digital records would soon reveal. Just 6 minutes after the shots, Margaret's phone, left unlocked on the counter, lit up with activity. Someone accessed her banking app, fingers tapping in the password on the first attempt. $1,200 transferred swiftly to a linked account under Caleb's name. The transaction timestamp aligned eerily with the estimated time of death, a digital footprint glowing like neon in the dim kitchen light. He had planned this step, believing speed and deletion would erase any trail. Outside, the neighborhood stirred faintly. A dog barked down the street, but no one connected the sounds to trouble in the Whitmore house. Caleb moved quickly now, wiping the revolver with bleach-dipped towels from under the sink, stuffing cash from Margaret's wallet into his backpack. He paused only once, glancing at her still form, expression unreadable in the shadows. Then he slipped out the back door, hood pulled low, backpack slung heavier over one shoulder. The side gate creaked softly as he exited, melting into the night. The digital breadcrumbs began accumulating immediately. Phone pings registered his device in the vicinity, cell towers triangulating his position with unerring accuracy. A quick search history entry on his browser, queries about fingerprint longevity on metal surfaces, typed with steady hands. He texted a friend an alibi. "Hanging at your place tonight?" as he walked briskly toward a bus stop. But one overlooked detail loomed, the neighbor's doorbell camera, its lens quietly vigilant. As sirens approached later that night, drawn by a concerned call from Margaret's daughter who couldn't reach her, red and blue lights danced across suburban windows like unwelcome intruders. The quiet cul-de-sac transformed into a scene of flashing urgency, paramedics confirming what was already evident. In the kitchen, the oven timer beeped forlornly, the cobbler forgotten and burnt. The night had ended one life and begun unraveling another, with evidence waiting patiently in the ether. The morning after the shooting dawned gray and ordinary over Jacksonville. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered across Margaret Whitmore's front yard like an unwelcome ribbon. Uniformed officers kept a respectful perimeter while detectives moved methodically through the house, photographing every surface, bagging small items that might later speak volumes. In the kitchen, the half-finished cobbler sat cold in its dish, a silent testament to interrupted normalcy. Outside, neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering in disbelief. Margaret? No way. She was the sweetest soul on the block? Caleb was located before noon. He had spent the night at a friend's house, or so he claimed, when two plainclothes detectives knocked on the door of 16-year-old Tyler Ramirez. Tyler's mother answered, eyes wide, then called her son downstairs. Caleb sat on the living room couch in yesterday's hoodie, playing on his phone as though nothing unusual had happened. When the detectives identified themselves, he looked up slowly, expression calm, almost bored. They asked him to step outside for a conversation. He complied without protest, slipping his phone into his pocket. In the driveway, under the shade of a live oak, they read him his rights. Caleb nodded at each line like someone who had seen the script before on television. "I loved my grandma," he said when they asked where he'd been the previous evening. His voice stayed even, practiced. "I was here all night. Tyler can tell you." Tyler, standing awkwardly on the porch steps, hesitated. He glanced at his mother, then at the detectives, then finally at Caleb. "He got here. Late," Tyler mumbled. "Like after 10, I think." The small discrepancy landed like a pebble in still water, sending the first ripples outward. Back at the station, Caleb sat in a softly lit interview room. No harsh lights, no two-way mirror drama, just a table, 4 chairs, and a digital recorder. Detective Maria Delgado handled the initial questioning while her partner, Sergeant James Carter, observed from the corner. They started gently. School, friends, how things were going at his grandmother's house. Caleb answered in short sentences, shoulders relaxed, fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the tabletop. Then they moved to the timeline. Walk us through last night again," Delgado said, sliding a legal pad toward him. Caleb repeated the story. Dinner with Margaret, video games in his room, sneaking out around 9 to meet Tyler because she'd fallen asleep early. He even offered a small shrug. "She gets tired fast these days." Delgado nodded, writing nothing. Carter stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper face down on the table. "We pulled your phone location data, Caleb. Your device was pinging the same tower as your grandmother's at 9:28 p.m. Then again at 9:37. Care to explain that?" Caleb's tapping stopped. For the first time his eyes flicked to the paper, then back to the detectives. "Must be a glitch," he said. "Phones do that sometimes." They let the silence stretch. Then Carter turned the sheet over. It showed a simple map overlay. Margaret's address circled in red, a bright blue dot marking Caleb's phone at the exact moment the bank transfer occurred, 6 minutes after the estimated time of the shooting. Caleb stared at the image longer than necessary. When he spoke again, his voice carried the faintest edge. "I don't know how that happened. Maybe I left my phone at her house earlier." Delgado leaned in slightly. "We also found bleach residue on the zipper of your backpack, the one you were carrying when you left Tyler's this morning. Funny thing, your grandmother kept bleach under her kitchen sink. Same brand." He swallowed once, visibly. "I clean stuff. My shoes get dirty." They moved on to the cash. When they opened the backpack earlier, after obtaining consent from his temporary guardian, they discovered $800 in crisp bills, rubber-banded together. Caleb said it was savings from birthdays and odd jobs. The detectives noted the explanation without comment, but they photographed every serial number. Later that afternoon, forensic techs completed a preliminary extraction on Caleb's phone. Deleted messages are rarely gone forever. Modern recovery tools can resurrect them like ghosts from deleted folders. One thread stood out, sent at 8:47 p.m. the previous evening to Tyler. "She'll regret saying no." The message had been followed by 3 dots, then nothing. Tyler never replied. When Delgado showed Caleb the printed screenshot, sliding it across the steel table, his composure cracked, just a hairline fracture, but unmistakable. His fingers curled inward. He stared at the words as though seeing them for the first time. "I was mad," he said finally. "She wouldn't give me money for a new controller, that's all." Delgado kept her tone level. "Mad enough to do something permanent?" He looked up then, eyes meeting hers directly. "I didn't hurt her, I swear." But the first real crack had appeared. Not a confession, not yet, but a fracture wide enough for truth to begin seeping through. The digital and physical evidence was aligning, piece by careful piece, like stones settling into place. Outside the interview room, Sergeant Carter leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching through the one-way glass. He had seen plenty of teenagers in that chair, scared ones, defiant ones, broken ones. This one still carried himself with the strange certainty of someone who believed the story could still be salvaged. He was wrong. The machinery of investigation had only just begun to turn, but already it was gaining momentum. And momentum, once started, is difficult to stop. The investigation moved into high gear the moment Caleb left the interview room. His calm demeanor had bought him nothing. Every answer he gave only sharpened the focus on what he hadn't said. Back at the forensics lab, technicians worked through the night under bright white lights, pulling data from devices that never truly forget. Phones, especially modern ones, are relentless archivists. They log location pings, app usage, search histories, even the precise angle at which a device is held. Caleb's phone told a story far more detailed than the one he offered detectives. First came the search history, recovered from browser cache and cloud backups he hadn't thought to clear. At 10:14 p.m., 43 minutes after the estimated time of the shooting, the screen showed, "How long do fingerprints stay on a gun?" 12 minutes later, "Can police trace deleted text messages?" Then, at 10:38, "What happens if you wipe a gun with bleach?" Each query appeared in neat chronological order, timestamps glowing like accusations. The final one, typed at 11:02 while he was supposedly safe at Tyler's house: "Does bleach remove gunshot residue?" Detectives printed the list and laid it beside the interview transcript. The contrast was stark. A boy claiming innocence while frantically researching how to defeat forensic evidence. No one searches those exact phrases unless they have immediate, personal reason to worry. Physical examination of the revolver came next. The gun had been wiped. Yes, Caleb had been thorough with the bleach-soaked paper towels. But thoroughness has limits. Under alternate light sources, faint oils from skin cells still clung to the textured grip. DNA technicians lifted partial profiles. One matched Caleb at 12 loci, probability of random match vanishingly small. Fibers from a blue bath towel, identical to the one missing from Margaret's linen closet, were caught in the cylinder release latch. Microscopic threads, pale against the dark metal, refused to disappear. The backpack yielded more. Beyond the cash bundle, technicians found trace bleach crystals lodged in the zipper teeth. A chemical analysis confirmed the same sodium hypochlorite concentration as the household cleaner under Margaret's sink. Inside one pocket, a crumpled receipt from a convenience store 2 blocks away, time-stamped 10:17 p.m., showing a purchase of energy drinks and a pack of gum, paid in cash. The same cash detectives suspected that now sat evidence-tagged on a steel table. But the most damning piece arrived from the cloud. Margaret's phone, though wiped of recent activity, had synced her banking app to a family-shared cloud account. The transfer of $1,200 appeared in transaction logs, complete with IP address and device identifier. The IP routed through Margaret's home Wi-Fi router. The device identifier belonged to Caleb's phone. 6 minutes after the shots, while Margaret lay motionless on her kitchen floor, someone had calmly logged in, entered her password, correct on the first try, and moved the money. No hesitation, no failed attempts. Someone who knew the code by heart. Video evidence sealed the timeline. The neighbor's Ring camera captured 2 critical moments. At 7:12 p.m., Caleb arrived home from school, hood down, backpack light on his shoulders, waving casually at the camera as he passed. At 9:42 p.m., he left again, hood up, face partially shadowed, backpack visibly sagging with added weight. The street light caught him mid-stride. Enhancement software sharpened the frame until the side profile of a 14-year-old boy became unmistakable. Same jawline, same slight forward tilt to the shoulders, same sneakers. Detective Delgado reviewed the footage on a large monitor, frame by frame. Noting the exact second Caleb glanced back toward the house. It was a quick look, less than 2 seconds, but enough to show awareness. He knew cameras existed. He simply hadn't accounted for this one. By dawn, the case file had thickened to nearly 2 inches. Ballistics confirmed the point. 3/8 fired the fatal rounds. Gunshot residue particles matched those lifted from the inner cuff of Caleb's hoodie sleeve, tiny spheres of lead, barium, and antimony, invisible to the naked eye, but screaming under scanning electron microscopy. The bleach attempt had reduced the quantity, but not eliminated it entirely. Caleb had believed technology would betray him only if he left obvious traces. He hadn't grasped how deeply modern life is recorded. Every tap, every ping, every search leaves a shadow. Those shadows had now aligned into a clear silhouette. Later that morning, Sergeant Carter returned to the interrogation room with fresh printouts. He placed them in front of Caleb without preamble. "Read them," he said quietly. Caleb scanned the pages, search history, transfer logs, enhanced still from the doorbell camera. His fingers rested on the table, no longer tapping. For the first time since arrest, the practiced calm wavered. His eyes moved rapidly across the text as though speed could outrun implication. "I want a lawyer," he said at last. The words came out flat, almost mechanical. Carter nodded once. "That's your right." He stood, gathered the papers, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You thought you could erase it all," he said, voice low. "But some things don't delete." The door clicked shut behind him. In the hallway, Delgado waited, arms crossed. "He's starting to feel it," she murmured. Carter gave a single nod. "Good, because the evidence isn't going anywhere." Outside, the Jacksonville sun climbed higher, indifferent to the weight settling over one small house and one even smaller life. Digital breadcrumbs, tiny, persistent, unforgiving, had led straight back to the boy who thought he could walk away clean. After formal charges, Caleb was transferred to the Duval Regional Juvenile Detention Center on the city's west side. The facility looked more like a low-slung school campus than a prison. Chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, squat brick buildings painted institutional beige, basketball courts visible through the bars. Inside, however, the atmosphere shifted. Metal detectors, constant head counts, voices echoing off polished concrete floors. For a 14-year-old who had spent his life in suburban bedrooms and quiet cul-de-sacs, the change was immediate and absolute. Caleb arrived wearing the standard-issue jumpsuit, bright orange, oversized at the shoulders, and slip-on canvas shoes that squeaked against the tile. Guards processed him quickly. Fingerprints, photographs, health screening. He cooperated without complaint, answering questions in the same flat tone he'd used during interrogation. When they asked if he understood why he was there, he gave a small shrug. "Yeah, they think I did something to my grandma." No tears, no trembling, just that same measured calm. In the general population wing, he was assigned to a 12-bed dorm. The other boys, ranging from 12 to 17, watched him arrive the way new animals are studied in a zoo enclosure. Some nodded in cautious greeting, others sized him up from their bunks. Within hours, the whispers started. Everyone knew who he was. The news cycle had been relentless. 14-year-old accused of killing grandmother over gaming money. His face had appeared on local broadcasts, the school photo they always use. Gap-toothed smile, neatly combed hair, now forever linked to headlines that refused to fade. Caleb didn't shrink from the attention. If anything, he leaned into it. During free time in the common area, he sat at a steel picnic-style table and answered questions with casual shrugs and half-smiles. "It wasn't like the movies," he told one older boy who asked how it happened. "Just happened." When another asked about the money, Caleb leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Needed a new setup. She said no." Simple as that. His tone carried no apology, only faint amusement, as though recounting a mildly inconvenient video game glitch. Guards noticed the behavior quickly. One veteran officer filed a report after overhearing Caleb in the day room. He was explaining sentencing ranges to a group of younger detainees the way a gamer explains difficulty levels. "First degree gets you life, but I'm 14, so probably juvie till 21, maybe adult court if they push it. Still beats getting caught slipping on the small stuff." He laughed, a short, dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. Another guard caught him standing in front of the polished metal door of a storage closet, practicing facial expressions, tilting his head, widening his eyes in mock innocence, then letting the smirk slide back into place like a favorite mask. A court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Elena Vasquez, conducted the first formal evaluation 2 weeks after intake. She met Caleb in a small beige room furnished with a bolted-down table and 2 chairs. Over 4 sessions, she observed the same pattern. Shallow affect, minimal eye contact when discussing Margaret, grandiose language when describing his own actions. He referred to the shooting as a mistake that got blown way out of proportion. When asked about remorse, he paused, then said, "I miss her cooking. That's about it." No elaboration, no visible emotion. Dr. Vasquez's report noted traits consistent with emerging narcissistic personality features: entitlement, lack of empathy, thrill-seeking through risk, and a striking absence of guilt. She wrote, "The subject displays an inflated sense of control and invulnerability, possibly reinforced by his belief that age will insulate him from meaningful consequences. This manifests in inappropriate affect, smirking during discussions of the offense, and minimization of victim impact. During one of the pre-trial hearings, the behavior spilled into public view. Caleb sat beside his attorney in the courtroom gallery while procedural matters were discussed. Margaret's daughter, Lisa, occupied the front row with other family members. At one point, Caleb turned slightly, caught her eye, and mouthed two words: "Relax." The motion was subtle, almost playful, but cameras positioned for pool coverage captured it clearly. Within hours, the clip circulated online, comment sections filled with outrage. "He's mocking her grief. That boy has no soul." Public sentiment hardened further. Calls for adult charges grew louder. Back in detention, the smirks continued. Caleb seemed to treat the facility like a temporary inconvenience, a level he could beat if he played it right. He traded commissary snacks for favors, kept score of who owed him what, maintained an air of detached superiority. Guards documented every incident, refusing group counseling, interrupting staff during head count to make sarcastic remarks, staring too long at reflective surfaces as though rehearsing his next performance. Yet beneath the bravado, small fractures appeared. Late at night, when lights were dimmed to a soft blue glow, some boys reported hearing him shift restlessly on his bunk. One roommate claimed Caleb muttered to himself once, voice barely audible, "They can't prove anything." But the words lacked conviction. The practiced smirk held during the day. In the dark, a doubt began to creep in at the edges. Dr. Vasquez noted the shift in her final summary before trial. While overt remorse remains absent, underlying anxiety is emerging in indirect ways: insomnia, increased isolation, fixation on perceived control. The subject's confidence appears performative rather than genuine. The performance, however, was far from over. Trial loomed like the next boss fight in a game he still believed he could win. And in the fluorescent-lit corridors of juvenile detention, the boy who once blew a kiss to a jury continued practicing his expressions in cold metal doors, smirking, tilting, adjusting, until the mask felt seamless again. But masks, no matter how carefully crafted, eventually crack under sustained pressure. And the courtroom pressure was about to become unrelenting. On the Duval County Courthouse stood solemn under a pale January sky, its marble steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps carrying hope, fear, and finality. Inside courtroom 4B, the air felt thick with anticipation on the morning the trial officially opened. Rows of benches filled quickly, reporters clutching notepads, family members holding hands, curious citizens who had followed the case through headlines now witnessing it in person. Overhead lights cast a clinical glow on the polished wood railings and the American flag hanging motionless beside the bench. Judge Eleanor Hargrove entered at exactly 9 a.m. Everyone rose in a soft wave of rustling fabric. She settled into her high-backed chair, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the room with the quiet authority that had silenced far louder voices than the one she was about to hear. "It's be seated," she said, and the courtroom obeyed. Prosecutor Angela Rivera rose first for opening statements. She walked to the center of the well, heels clicking softly, and faced the jury with measured calm. "This is not a story of impulse or accident," she began. "This is a story of calculated entitlement. On the night of October 15th, 14-year-old Caleb Whitmore made a deliberate choice. when his grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, a woman who had opened her home and her heart to him, refused to hand over money for a luxury he demanded. He retrieved a family revolver from a drawer he knew well. He walked into the kitchen where she was preparing dessert for the family she loved. He raised that weapon. He fired twice. Then he used her phone, unlocked because she trusted him, to transfer $1,200 into his own account. Rivera paused, letting the words settle. She turned slightly toward the defense table where Caleb sat beside his attorney, hands folded, expression carefully neutral. Margaret Whitmore raised her arm in the only defense she had time for. One bullet struck her shoulder. The second took her life. 6 minutes later, while she lay dying on her kitchen floor, the defendant completed his plan. This was not rage. This was premeditation born of a belief that his wants outweighed her life. And when the evidence became too heavy to ignore, he attempted to erase it, wiping the gun, deleting messages, crafting alibis. But evidence, ladies and gentlemen, does not vanish because someone wishes it away. She stepped closer to the jury box. You will hear about youth. You will hear about brain development. But youth does not erase choice. It does not erase consequence. And it certainly does not erase the betrayal of the one person who believed in him most. Rivera returned to her seat. The courtroom remained hushed. Defense attorney Marcus Hale stood next. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to difficult cases. Caleb Whitmore is 14 years old, he said simply, letting the number hang in the air. 14, a child still developing judgment, impulse control, emotional regulation. The prosecution will ask you to see a cold-blooded killer. Yet we ask you to see a troubled teenager whose brain is literally not yet finished forming. Hale walked slowly along the front of the jury box. Caleb grew up in a household under strain. School troubles, family moves, the pressure of fitting in online worlds that promise escape but deliver isolation. When he came to live with his grandmother, he was seeking stability. Instead, he found conflict over money, over boundaries, over expectations he wasn't equipped to meet. He stopped, facing the panel directly. This tragedy is heartbreaking. No one disputes that Margaret Whitmore's death was senseless and devastating. But it was not the product of a mature, calculating mind. It was the tragic outcome of immaturity colliding with desperation. Caleb did not plan murder. He acted out of panic and poor decision-making, decisions shaped by a still-developing prefrontal cortex. Science tells us adolescents process risk and consequence differently. The law recognizes that difference. We ask you to remember it when you weigh the evidence. Hale returned to his seat. Caleb stared straight ahead, jaw set, giving nothing away. Then came the moment everyone had anticipated. During a brief recess in the afternoon session, while attorneys argued over the admissibility of certain search history screenshots, Caleb turned in his chair. The movement was slow, deliberate. He looked directly at the jury box. 12 faces looked back, some startled, some already wary from days of pre-trial coverage. Caleb's lips pursed. He blew them a kiss, soft, theatrical, unmistakable. The gesture lingered a full 2 seconds before he turned forward again, the corner of his mouth lifting into that familiar half-smirk. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. One juror, a woman in her 50s, pressed fingers to her lips. Another man shook his head slowly, disbelief etched across his features. Margaret's daughter gripped the bench in front of her until her knuckles blanched. Judge Hargrove's gavel cracked once, sharp, immediate. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice low but carrying to every corner. "You will face forward. You will not direct any gestures, remarks, or expressions toward this jury for the remainder of these proceedings. If you do, you will be removed from the courtroom and the trial will continue in your absence." She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Caleb's. This courtroom is not a stage. Those 12 citizens are not your audience. They are the finders of fact in a case that concerns the loss of a human life. Treat them, and this process, with the respect it demands. Caleb's smirk faltered for perhaps half a second. Then it steadied, smaller now, more contained. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned his gaze to the table in front of him. The judge let the silence hold another beat before continuing. The jury is instructed to disregard the defendant's gesture. Focus only on the evidence presented. But the moment could not be unspoken. It hung in the room like smoke after a gunshot, impossible to ignore, impossible to unsee. Authority had been challenged in open court. The line between performance and accountability had been drawn in full view. Outside in the hallway during the next break, reporters typed furiously. Social media already buzzed with screen-captured stills from courtroom cameras. He blew a kiss to the jury. No remorse. That smirk. The theater Caleb seemed to crave had begun, but the audience was no longer on his side. Inside, the trial pressed forward. Witnesses were called. Evidence folders thickened on counsel tables. And somewhere beneath the polished surface of procedure, the weight of what had happened in that quiet kitchen continued to press down, unyielding, patient, and growing heavier with every passing hour. The prosecution's case unfolded like a slow, deliberate reveal, each piece of evidence placed before the jury with precision that left little room for doubt. Prosecutor Angela Rivera called her witnesses in careful sequence, building a narrative that started in the quiet routines of Margaret Whitmore's home and ended in the cold fluorescence of forensic laboratories. The courtroom monitors, large screens mounted high on either wall, became the silent co-narrators, displaying text messages, timestamps, still frames, and chemical spectra in crisp, unforgiving detail. First came the phone records. A digital forensics expert from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement took the stand, walking the jury through recovered data, like a guide leading them down a dark hallway. On the screen appeared Caleb's deleted thread with Tyler, the message sent at 8:47 p.m. "She'll regret saying no," followed by 3 bouncing dots that never resolved into a reply. The expert explained how deletion only moves files to a recoverable partition. The specialized software had pulled them back intact. When Rivera asked if the message showed premeditation, the expert answered simply, "It shows intent formed before the act." Next, the banking transfer. Another analyst projected Margaret's account activity. The screen filled with a clean timeline, 9:31 p.m., approximate time of the shots, then 9:37 p.m., log in from the home Wi-Fi IP, password accepted on attempt 1, $1,200 moved to Caleb's linked youth account. The jury saw the transaction confirmation pop up in green text, a small digital victory that now looked obscene in hindsight. Rivera asked the witness, would someone unfamiliar with the password succeed on the first try? The answer came without hesitation. Statistically unlikely. Familiarity with the code is the most reasonable explanation. Ballistics followed, and the firearms examiner, a calm man in his late 50s, displayed photographs of the recovered .38 revolver beside enlarged images of the 2 spent casings found near Margaret's body. He pointed out matching striations, unique microscopic scratches left by the gun's barrel, confirming both bullets came from that weapon. Then came the residue evidence. Under high magnification, tiny spherical particles appeared on the screen. Lead, barium, antimony fused in the characteristic shapes produced by gunshot discharge. These same particles had been lifted from the inner cuff of Caleb's hoodie. The concentration and distribution are consistent with recent firing, he testified. Not handling, firing. The bleach attempt was addressed next. A trace evidence specialist showed close-ups of the backpack zipper. White crystalline deposits magnified until they looked like frost on metal. Chemical testing matched the composition to the household bleach bottle recovered from under Margaret's sink. Same pH, same stabilizers. Bleach degrades organic material, the expert explained, but it leaves detectable residues, especially in crevices. The attempt was made, but it was incomplete. Security footage played in near silence. The neighbor's Ring camera clip ran on loop. Caleb arriving at 7:12 p.m., casual wave, light backpack, then leaving at 9:42 p.m., hood up, backpack visibly heavier, one backward glance caught in the streetlight's glow. Enhanced stills appeared side by side with Caleb's school photo. Same jaw angle, same slight forward lean in his walk. No one in the jury box needed the expert to point out the match. The resemblance was unmistakable. Margaret's daughter, Lisa, took the stand near the end of the day's session. She walked to the witness box with measured steps, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Rivera asked her to describe finding her mother. Lisa's voice started steady, but cracked midway. "I used my key. The house was too quiet. I called out, 'Mom?' No answer. I went to the kitchen, and she was on the floor, still had flour on her hands. The rolling pin was beside her. The cobbler was burning in the oven." She paused, eyes glistening. "I tried to wake her. I knew she was gone, but I tried anyway." The courtroom remained utterly still. Several jurors reached for tissues. One man in the back row wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. Lisa continued, a voice quieter now. She trusted him. Completely. She kept her phone unlocked because family doesn't need locks. She kept the gun in that drawer because it reminded her of Dad, not because she ever thought it would be used against her. Rivera handed her a tissue and asked one final question. "Did Caleb ever express frustration about money or the gaming console?" Lisa nodded slowly. He asked her for it more than once. She always said the same thing. "Earn it, sweetheart." He'd storm off to his room after, slam the door. "But I never thought, I never imagined." She returned to her seat beside her sister, both women leaning into each other for support. As the day's session closed, the monitors went dark one by one. The last image to fade was the frozen frame of Caleb, leaving through the side gate, hood up, backpack heavy. The face half turned toward the camera that never blinked. It lingered on the screen for several seconds before the technician powered it down. Judge Hargrove adjourned until morning. The jury filed out in silence, faces drawn, shoulders set. They had seen the kitchen photos, the autopsy diagrams, carefully redacted to show only necessary detail, the text messages, the money trail, the residue, the video. Piece by piece, the prosecution had constructed a mosaic that no longer allowed for reasonable doubt. Caleb remained seated as the room emptied. His attorney leaned close, whispering urgently. Caleb listened, nodded once, then stared straight ahead at the now blank screens. The smirk that had defined so many of his earlier appearances was absent. In its place was something smaller, tight-lipped, guarded, almost watchful. To outside the courthouse, evening light slanted across the steps. Reporters surged forward with microphones and cameras, but the family walked past without comment, heads down, arms linked. The evidence had spoken clearly that day. It had not shouted. It had not needed to. It simply accumulated, layer upon layer, until the weight became undeniable. Tomorrow the defense would present its case. Tomorrow they would try to introduce doubt, to reframe immaturity as mitigation, to separate the boy from the act. But tonight, in the quiet after adjournment, the courtroom still echoed with what had already been shown. And what had been shown refused to fade. The defense phase opened on a Tuesday morning with the courtroom already heavy from the weight of the previous days. Marcus Hale called his first witness, Dr. Robert Klein, a clinical psychologist specializing in adolescent brain development. Dr. Klein, silver-haired and measured in speech, took the stand and explained to the jury in clear, patient terms how the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and understanding consequences, does not fully mature until the mid-20s. At 14, he said, the brain is wired more for immediate reward than for weighing future risk. Emotional regulation is still developing. Decision-making under stress often defaults to the more primitive, reactive parts of the brain. Hale asked him to apply this science to Caleb's case. Dr. Klein reviewed the available records, school disciplinary reports, family statements, the psychological evaluation conducted in detention. We see a pattern of poor impulse control, a fixation on short-term gratification, here, the gaming console, and difficulty processing delayed consequences. The behavior described is consistent with an immature brain responding to frustration in an exaggerated, poorly considered way. Not the product of cold calculation, but of developmental limitation. Rivera rose for cross-examination. She approached the witness stand without notes, her posture relaxed but focused. Doctor, you've described immaturity. Let me ask you about planning. She gestured toward the now familiar monitor. If a 14-year-old researches how long do fingerprints stay on a gun 40 minutes after a shooting, is that impulse or forethought? Dr. Klein adjusted his glasses. It could indicate an attempt to cover tracks after the fact, still consistent with adolescent risk assessment being incomplete. He may not have fully grasped how ineffective those efforts would be. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. And searching for ways to defeat forensic evidence before the act? The message, "She'll regret saying no," sent over an hour before the shooting. Does that reflect mature premeditation or childish venting? The doctor paused. It's possible to interpret either way. Adolescents often express anger dramatically without intending follow-through. Rivera let the answer hang, then shifted direction. You've read the detention reports, the practicing of facial expressions in reflective surfaces. The casual discussion of sentencing ranges like video game levels, the mouthing of relax to the victim's daughter in open court. Do those behaviors suggest someone struggling with underdeveloped impulse control or someone deliberately performing for effect? Dr. Klein answered carefully. They suggest a need for attention and control, which can be heightened in adolescents facing high stress. It doesn't necessarily indicate malice. Rivera stepped closer. And the kiss blown to the jury during trial? The smirk that has been consistent across multiple settings? Help us understand, Doctor. Is that the prefrontal cortex still maturing, or is that a conscious choice to mock the process and the people in this room? For the first time, Dr. Klein hesitated visibly. Those actions do appear more calculated, more aware of audience reaction. They complicate the picture. Thank you, Doctor. Rivera returned to her table. The concession, small as it was, I landed like a stone in still water. Caleb was called to testify the following afternoon. He walked to the stand with the same measured steps he had used since arrest. Shoulders back, chin level, no visible nerves. Hale began gently, guiding him through his version of events. Caleb spoke in a low, even voice. He described arguments over money, feeling trapped at his grandmother's house, wanting the console so badly it hurt. He said the night started with him asking again. Margaret refused. He went to his room angry. Then, I don't really remember picking up the gun. It was like everything went fuzzy. Next thing I knew, it happened. Hale asked about remorse. Caleb looked down at his hands. I wish I could take it back. I miss her. I miss the way things were. The jury watched him closely. Several leaned forward slightly, searching for sincerity. Rivera's cross-examination began quietly. You told police you were at Tyler's house all night. That was a lie, correct? Caleb nodded. Yeah, I panicked. You transferred money from her account 6 minutes after the shooting. How did you know her password? She told me once, for emergencies. You wiped the gun with bleach. Why? I was scared. I didn't want to get in trouble. Rivera displayed the search history screenshots on the monitor. You looked up how to remove fingerprints and delete texts less than an hour after. Were you scared then too, or already thinking about how to avoid consequences? Caleb shifted in the chair. Both, I guess. She advanced to the autopsy photo diagram, carefully cropped to show only trajectory lines. The bullets traveled downward. Your grandmother was shorter than you. She was backing away when you shot her. Does that sound like something that just happened in a fuzzy moment? Caleb's eyes flicked to the screen, then away. I don't know. Rivera played the courtroom security clip of him blowing the kiss to the jury. The gesture replayed in slow motion, lips pursed, eyes locked on the panel, smirk blooming afterward. The room went completely silent. Explain that to us, Caleb. Why blow a kiss to the people deciding whether you spend decades in prison? He stared at the frozen image of himself. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I thought it was funny. I don't know why. Rivera let the answer echo. Funny? She returned to counsel table without another word. Caleb stepped down from the stand, looking smaller than when he had climbed up. His shoulders rounded slightly. The practiced posture had slipped. He avoided looking at the gallery where Margaret's family sat. For the first time since the night everything changed, he appeared not like a performer, but like what he actually was. 14 years old, pale, exposed, and, perhaps for the first time, beginning to feel the real weight of what he had done. The smirk that had carried him through detention, through early hearings, through so much of the trial, was gone. In its place was something quieter, more uncertain. A bead of sweat traced a slow path from his hairline down his temple. He wiped it away with the back of his cuffed hand, the motion small and almost childlike. Outside the courtroom windows, afternoon light slanted low across Jacksonville. Inside, the air felt different, tighter, heavier, as though the room itself had drawn a long breath and was waiting to exhale. The defense rested shortly after. Closing arguments would come tomorrow. But something fundamental had shifted in those final hours of testimony. The boy who once believed he could outsmart consequence had just sat in front of 12 strangers and watched his own carefully constructed mask crack wide open under cross-examination. And once cracked, some things are very difficult to repair. The courtroom emptied slowly after closing arguments concluded on that final Thursday afternoon. Prosecutor Angela Rivera had spoken last, her voice steady and unhurried as she reminded the 12 jurors of the kitchen floor, the flour-dusted hands, in the downward bullet trajectory, the deliberate digital transfer, and, most piercingly, the kiss blown across the rail toward them. This defendant did not act like a frightened child caught in panic, she said in conclusion. He acted like someone who believed the rules did not apply to him. Youth explains many things. It does not excuse murder. Marcus Hale countered with equal calm in rebuttal. Immaturity is not an excuse. It is an explanation. The law provides for it. Sentencing guidelines recognize it. Science confirms it. Do not let understandable outrage blind you to developmental reality. Caleb Whitmore committed a terrible act. He is still a boy who can be reached, who can change, who can one day understand the full gravity of what he has done. Judge Hargrove gave final instructions, clear, concise, devoid of emotion. She reminded the panel that their sole task was to determine guilt or innocence based solely on evidence presented, not sympathy, not anger, not public opinion. She defined the elements of second-degree murder, unlawful killing with depraved indifference, or during commission of a felony. She explained grand theft. She emphasized reasonable doubt. Then she excused them to the deliberation room. The 12 filed out through the side door at 3:47 p.m. The heavy latch clicked behind them. Outside in the hallway, Margaret's family gathered in a tight knot near the windows. Lisa held her sister's hand. Their mother, Margaret's older sister, sat on a wooden bench, clutching a small framed photo of the victim, smiling in her garden. Reporters hovered at a respectful distance, cameras rolling but microphones lowered. No one spoke much. The wait had begun. Inside the deliberation room, a windowless space furnished with a long table, 12 padded chairs, a coffee station, and a single wall-mounted television muted on the local news channel, the jurors took their seats. The foreperson, a 52-year-old logistics manager named Karen Ellis, asked everyone to introduce themselves briefly and share initial thoughts. No one rushed. They started with the physical evidence. Everyone agreed the timeline was tight and damning. Shots at 9:31, transfer at 9:37. Caleb's phone pinging the same tower, the ring footage showing him leaving with a heavier backpack. One juror, a retired nurse in her 60s, pointed out the defensive bruising on Margaret's arm. She was trying to stop him. She knew exactly who was holding the gun. Another, a 38-year-old mechanic, shook his head at the search queries. He wasn't panicking. He was problem-solving. That's not impulse. The kiss came up almost immediately. Several jurors described the moment the same way. Not nervous, not confused. Deliberate. "He looked right at us," said a young teacher, "like we were part of the game." The room grew quieter after that. They reviewed Caleb's testimony. Most found it rehearsed, lacking depth. When pressed on cross-examination about the downward trajectory, she was backing away. His answers had grown vague, then silent. One juror noted how small he had looked leaving the stand, how the practiced confidence evaporated under direct questioning. He finally realized this wasn't a game he could win with attitude. They debated the brain development argument at length. The science was real, and several acknowledged adolescents do make terrible decisions. But one older juror, a former high school principal, spoke quietly. "I taught 14-year-olds for 30 years. Some were impulsive, some were cruel. Very few planned cover-ups, transferred money, and then mocked a jury. That crosses a line." 4 hours passed. Coffee cups emptied and were refilled. Notes were passed, reread, set aside. At 7:32 p.m., after a final round-robin poll, Karen Ellis asked for silence. She wrote the verdict form carefully, folded it, and pressed the call button. The courtroom refilled within minutes. Margaret's family returned to the front row, faces pale but composed. Caleb was brought in last, escorted by 2 deputies. He sat beside his attorney, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. No smirk now, no practiced posture, just stillness. Judge Hargrove entered. Everyone rose. She took her seat, nodded to the bailiff. The jury filed back in, expressions unreadable. Karen Ellis handed the folded form to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Judge Hargrove opened it, read silently, then looked up. "The clerk will publish the verdict." The clerk stood. In the matter of the state of Florida versus Caleb Whitmore on the charge of second-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. On the charge of grand theft, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A soft sound escaped the gallery, half sob, half exhale. Lisa pressed both hands to her mouth. Her sister wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Caleb's mother bowed her head, tears falling freely onto her lap. Caleb himself did not move. His jaw clenched once, visibly, but no tears came. He stared at the ceiling lights as though counting them. Judge Hargrove thanked the jury for their service and excused them. She set sentencing for 3 weeks later, allowing time for presentence investigations and victim impact preparation. "Court is adjourned," she said quietly. The gavel fell once, crisp, final. As deputies moved to escort Caleb back to holding, he glanced toward the gallery for the first time that day. His eyes met Lisa's. She held his gaze without flinching. Whatever he saw there, grief, exhaustion, quiet resolve, made him look away first. The courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters rushed to the hallway for live shots. Family members embraced in small circles, some crying openly, others simply standing in stunned relief. Outside the windows, Jacksonville's evening traffic moved on, indifferent. Inside the now silent room, the evidence folders remained stacked on counsel tables. The monitors were dark, the jury chairs stood empty. And on the bench, Judge Hargrove gathered her notes with deliberate care. Justice had spoken once. The verdict was clear, but sentencing would speak louder still, and everyone who had sat through those long weeks knew the next hearing would carry a gravity all its own. 3 weeks after the verdict, the Duval County Courthouse felt different. The crowds had thinned. Most media vans had moved on to fresher stories. Yet the benches in courtroom 4B filled steadily that February morning in 2025. Family members arrived early, claiming the same front-row seats they had held throughout the trial. Margaret's daughter, Lisa, carried a small stack of printed photographs, her mother smiling at holiday tables, gardening in sunlight, reading to young grandchildren. She placed them carefully on the rail in front of her, a quiet gallery of what had been taken away. Caleb entered last, escorted by 2 deputies. The orange jumpsuit had been replaced with a plain gray shirt and slacks provided by his attorney. Small concessions meant to humanize him for the day's proceedings. His hair was neatly combed, but his face looked thinner, eyes shadowed from nights that no longer allowed easy sleep. He sat beside Marcus Hale without glancing toward the gallery. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers motionless. Judge Eleanor Hargrove took the bench at 9:15 a.m. She wore her usual black robe, expression composed but carrying the same quiet gravity that had marked every session. After calling the case, she addressed both counsel tables. Today we determine disposition in this matter. The jury has spoken on guilt. Sentencing guidelines for juveniles in Florida allow a range of options, from commitment to a juvenile facility until age 21, to blended sentencing that transitions to adult corrections to adult sanctions in exceptional cases. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation report, psychological evaluations, school records, detention center behavioral logs, and letters submitted by both sides. I have also considered victim impact statements filed with the court. She paused, letting her gaze move slowly across the room. Mr. Whitmore, you are here because you took a life, not in a moment of uncontrollable rage, but in pursuit of something material. You then attempted to conceal that act with calculation that belied your age. The jury found you guilty. Today, this court must decide what sentence reflects both accountability and the possibility, if any, of rehabilitation. Prosecutor Angela Rivera rose first to present the state's recommendation. She spoke without notes, voice clear and unhurried. Your Honor, the state requests a blended sentence, adjudication as an adult for sentencing purposes, with initial placement in a high-security juvenile facility followed by transfer to the Department of Corrections upon reaching 18. We ask for a term of 25 years, with eligibility for review only after serving 85% of that time. This is not vengeance. It is proportionality. Rivera turned slightly toward the defense table. This defendant showed no genuine remorse during trial. He mocked the jury in open court. He practiced expressions in detention mirrors. He mouthed, "Relax," to the victim's daughter during a hearing. These are not the actions of a frightened, immature child. They are the actions of someone who believed, perhaps still believes, that consequences can be gamed, delayed, or laughed away. She gestured toward the gallery. Margaret Whitmore was 68 years old. She was baking dessert for her family. She raised her arm in the only defense available to her. The trauma inflicted on her survivors is permanent. The state submits that anything less than significant incarceration fails to acknowledge the gravity of what was done. Rivera sat. The room remained hushed. Marcus Hale stood next. He adjusted his tie once, then faced the bench. Your Honor, Caleb is 14 years old. He will turn 15 next month. Brain science, which the court has heard extensively, and tells us his capacity for mature judgment is still forming. The President's report notes no prior violent offenses, only school disciplinary issues typical of troubled adolescents. In detention, he has complied with programming, completed required classes, and shown no further incidents of aggression. Hale glanced briefly at his client. We do not minimize the loss. Margaret Whitmore was loved deeply. Her family's pain is real and enduring, but sentencing a 14-year-old to decades in adult prison risks turning a redeemable young person into someone hardened beyond repair. We ask the court to impose juvenile sanctions, commitment to the Department of Juvenile Justice until age 21, with mandatory therapy, education, and vocational training. If blended sentencing is deemed necessary, we respectfully request the shortest possible adult tale, with earliest possible review. He returned to his seat. Caleb stared at the table, expression unreadable. Judge Hargrove nodded once to both attorneys, then turned to the gallery. The court will now hear victim impact statements. Mrs. Lisa Reynolds, you may proceed. Lisa stood slowly. She carried only one photograph, the most recent one of her mother, taken the previous spring, holding a basket of garden tomatoes. She placed it on the podium and looked directly at the bench. Your Honor? My mother was the heart of our family. She baked peach cobbler every Sunday because it made people smile. She kept peppermints by the door for any child who visited. She trusted completely, especially family. That trust cost her life. Her voice remained steady, although her hands trembled slightly on the podium. Caleb lived in her home for 6 months. She drove him to school, helped with homework, tried to guide him. When he asked for money, she said no, not out of cruelty, but because she believed in earning things. That refusal ended her life. And then he used her phone, while she lay dying, to take what she wouldn't give. Lisa paused, drawing a slow breath. He blew a kiss to the jury that would decide his fate. He rolled his eyes when I spoke earlier. Those moments replay in my mind every day. They tell me he still doesn't understand or doesn't care what he destroyed. She looked toward Caleb for the first time. He kept his gaze lowered. I don't know if he can change. I hope he can, for his own sake. But I know my mother will never see another spring. Holidays are empty now. Our recipes sit untouched. The house she loved was sold because none of us could bear to walk through the kitchen again. Lisa lifted the photograph so the judge could see it clearly. This is who he took from us. Not a statistic, a person, a grandmother, a mother. Please, Your Honor, let the sentence reflect that loss. She returned to her seat. No one spoke. Several people in the gallery wiped their eyes quietly. Judge Hargrove let the silence hold for nearly a minute. Then she addressed the room. The court has heard the recommendations and the statements. I will take them under advisement. Sentencing will be pronounced this afternoon at 2 p.m. Court stands in recess until then. The gavel fell softly. As deputies led Caleb away, he passed close to the front row. For a fraction of a second, his eyes lifted toward Lisa. She met his gaze without anger, only quiet, unyielding sorrow. He looked away first, shoulders rounding slightly as he disappeared through the side door. The courtroom emptied in slow waves. Outside, February sunlight slanted through bare branches. Inside, the framed photograph remained on the podium, Margaret smiling, tomatoes cradled in her arms, forever frozen in a moment before everything changed. The air felt heavier than at any point during the trial. Everyone knew the next hours would carry the final weight of authority, answering arrogance. And no one doubted the response would be brutal in its clarity. The courtroom reconvened at 2 o'clock, sharp. Afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, catching motes of dust in slow motion above the benches. The gallery had filled again, quieter this time, as though everyone understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Margaret's family returned to their front row seats. Lisa carried the same framed photograph, now joined by a small folded letter she had written the night before. Her sister sat beside her, hand resting lightly on her arm. Caleb was escorted in moments later. He kept his eyes on the floor as he took his place beside his attorney. Judge Hargrove entered. The room rose, then settled. She arranged her notes with deliberate care before speaking. The court has heard the recommendations of counsel and reviewed all submitted materials. Before pronouncing sentence, I will allow additional victim impact statements if any wish to be heard. Lisa stood without hesitation. She approached the podium carrying only the photograph and her letter. She placed Margaret's smiling face on the wooden surface where everyone could see it clearly. Sunlight on tomatoes, gentle eyes crinkled at the corners. Then she unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read in a voice that started soft but grew steadier with each sentence. Your Honor, my mother didn't just die that night. Our entire sense of safety died with her. She was the one who made every holiday feel like home. She baked peach cobbler because the smell reminded her of her own childhood kitchen. She kept the recipe card in her handwriting, edges worn from years of use. After she was gone, we found that card still on the counter, flour-dusted, next to the rolling pin. None of us have been able to touch it since. She paused, fingers tightening on the paper. Caleb lived under her roof for half a year. She washed his clothes, packed his lunches, listened to his stories about games and friends. When he wanted something she couldn't or wouldn't give, she explained why. She believed in teaching responsibility. She believed he could learn it. Instead, he chose to end her life over $1,200 and a gaming console. A soft sound escaped someone in the gallery. A muffled sob quickly swallowed. Lisa continued without looking up. He didn't stop at taking her life. He took her phone while she lay there and used it to steal what she had refused him. Then he tried to erase every trace, wiping the gun, deleting messages, crafting stories. When that didn't work, he sat in this very courtroom and blew a kiss to the jury deciding his future. He rolled his eyes during my earlier statement. Those moments replay in my head every single day. They tell me the person who did this still sees other people's pain as something distant, something he can shrug off or mock. She lifted her gaze for the first time, looking not at Caleb, but at the judge. Holidays are hollow now. Mother's Day comes and goes without her voice on the phone. Birthdays feel incomplete. The house she loved so much was sold because walking through the kitchen felt like stepping into a memory we couldn't survive. Her peppermint jar, always full for any child who visited, sits empty on someone else's shelf. We donated it because keeping it hurt too much. Lisa's voice trembled once, then steadied again. I don't know if Caleb can ever truly understand what he took from us. I don't know if he's capable of the kind of remorse that would matter. But I do know my mother deserved better than to die on her own kitchen floor because her grandson decided her life was worth less than a video game. I ask this court to remember her, not as a name in a file, but as a person who loved deeply, trusted completely, and paid the ultimate price for it. She folded the letter carefully, placed it beside the photograph, and returned to her seat. Her sister reached for her hand. They sat together in silence, shoulders touching. Another family member, a cousin, spoke briefly after her. She described Margaret's Sunday dinners, the way she'd call every week just to check in, the quiet strength she carried through every difficulty. Her words were shorter, but no less piercing. When she finished, the courtroom held its breath. Judge Hargrove let the silence stretch. No one moved, no papers rustled. Even the deputies stood motionless. Finally, she spoke. The court has heard these statements. They are now part of the official record. She turned her attention to the defense table. Mr. Whitmore, is there anything you wish to say before sentence is imposed? Caleb's attorney leaned close, whispering urgently. Caleb listened, then gave a small nod. He rose slowly, hands clasped in front of him. For several long seconds he stared at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost inaudible at first. I know what I did was wrong. I'm sorry for what happened to my grandma. I wish I could change it." He stopped. No elaboration followed. No tears. No further words. He sat again, eyes fixed on the table. The judge regarded him for a long moment. Then she turned to her notes. "This court has considered everything presented: the pre-sentence investigation, the psychological evaluations, the trial testimony, the jury's verdict, the recommendations of counsel, and the powerful statements just heard." The crime was brutal in its intimacy. A grandmother killed in her own kitchen by the grandson she sheltered. The motive was material gain. The aftermath involved deliberate attempts to conceal the act. The defendant's behavior throughout these proceedings, most notably the gestures directed at the jury, demonstrated a troubling lack of appreciation for the gravity of what occurred. She paused, letting each phrase settle. Youth is a factor the law requires this court to weigh. However, youth is not a shield against accountability when actions show planning, calculation, and subsequent mockery of the process meant to deliver justice. Caleb's shoulders tensed visibly. Judge Hargrove continued, voice calm but carrying the weight of finality. Therefore, the court adjudicates Caleb Whitmore as an adult for sentencing purposes. He is committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections. The sentence is 25 years incarceration, with eligibility for review only after serving 21 years and 3 months, 85% of the term. Credit for time served will be applied. Upon release, he will be subject to 10 years of probation with strict conditions, including mandatory counseling and no contact with the victim's family absent their express consent. A soft collective breath escaped the gallery. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, hand tightening around her sister's. Judge Hargrove looked directly at Caleb. "You treated this courtroom like a stage. You treated your grandmother's life like currency. You mistook youth for immunity. Let me be clear, there is no immunity here. What you did cannot be undone. But you will have years, long years, to reflect on it." She lifted the gavel. "This court stands adjourned." The gavel struck once, sharp, resounding, final. Deputies moved to Caleb's side. He rose without resistance, wrists already cuffed. As he was led past the front row, he did not look toward Lisa or the photograph still resting on the podium. His head remained lowered, steps mechanical. The courtroom slowly emptied. Margaret's family remained seated a moment longer, staring at the bench where justice had finally answered. Lisa reached forward and lifted the photograph gently, unpressing it to her chest. Outside, February light continued to fall across the courthouse steps. Inside, the room grew quiet again, emptier but somehow lighter, as though a long-held breath had at last been released. The courtroom had grown quieter in the final minutes before Judge Hargrove spoke again. Afternoon sunlight had shifted, now falling in long pale bars across the carpeted floor and the empty jury box. Every seat remained filled, yet the air felt thinner, as though the room itself understood that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Caleb sat motionless at the defense table, wrists resting on the polished wood, eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the bench and the floor. His attorney placed a reassuring hand briefly on his shoulder, then withdrew it. Judge Hargrove adjusted her glasses once, then set them down beside her notes. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the bench, and looked directly at the boy before her. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm, measured tone that had defined every ruling in this case. Yet beneath it lay an unmistakable edge of steel. Caleb Whitmore. She let his name hang in the silence for 3 full seconds. "You are 14 years old. The law requires this court to consider your age, your developmental stage, the possibility that time and intervention might one day bring understanding and change. I have considered all of those things carefully. She paused, letting the words settle. But I have also considered what happened on the night of October 15th. You took a revolver from a drawer in the home where you were welcomed and sheltered. You walked into the kitchen where your grandmother, 68 years old, flour on her hands, baking dessert for the family she loved, was standing. You raised that weapon. You fired twice. One bullet struck her shoulder as she raised her arm in the only defense she had time to attempt. The second ended her life. The judge's gaze never wavered. Then, while she lay dying on the floor, she had scrubbed clean countless times. You picked up her phone, the phone she kept unlocked because she trusted you, and transferred $1,200 into your own account. 6 minutes. That is how long it took you to move from taking her life to taking her money. A soft sound came from the gallery, someone stifling a sob. Judge Hargrove continued without pause. You attempted to erase what you had done. You wiped the gun with bleach. You deleted messages. You searched how to defeat forensic evidence. You crafted an alibi. And when those efforts failed, when the truth became unavoidable, you sat in this courtroom and treated the process like entertainment. She leaned forward another fraction of an inch. You blew a kiss to the jury, the 12 citizens tasked with deciding whether you would face meaningful consequences. You smirked during testimony about your grandmother's final moments. You rolled your eyes when her daughter spoke of the empty holidays that now stretch before her family. You mouthed, "Relax," to the woman whose mother you killed. The judge's voice remained level, but the words landed with precision. You treated this courtroom like a stage. You treated your grandmother's life like currency. You mistook youth for immunity. She straightened, folding her hands on the bench. Let me be very clear, there is no immunity here. Caleb's shoulders rose and fell once, barely perceptible, but he did not look up. The sentence of this court is as follows. You are adjudicated as an adult for purposes of disposition. You are committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections. The term of incarceration is 25 years. You will be eligible for review only after serving 21 years and 3 months, 85% of the imposed sentence. Credit for time served since arrest will be applied. Upon release, you will be subject to 10 years of supervised probation with conditions including no contact with the victim's family absent their written consent, mandatory participation in victim impact awareness programming, ongoing mental health treatment, and no possession of firearms or weapons of any kind. She paused one final time. You will spend the next quarter century, most of your remaining youth and all of your young adulthood, in a state correctional facility. There will be no mirrors to practice expressions in. There will be no juries to perform for. There will be time, long, quiet, uninterrupted time, to sit with what you have done. Judge Hargrove lifted the gavel. She held it suspended for a heartbeat. This sentence reflects the gravity of the offense, the deliberate nature of your actions, and the complete absence of meaningful remorse throughout these proceedings. It also leaves open the distant possibility that years of reflection, structure, and required programming may one day produce something different from the person who sits before me today. The gavel struck once, sharp, final, echoing off the high ceiling like the closing of a heavy door. Court stands adjourned. The sound lingered as deputies moved to Caleb's side. He rose slowly, wrists already cuffed in front. For the first time since the trial began, the smirk was gone entirely. His face looked small, pale, almost ordinary, a 14-year-old boy who had finally run out of performances. As he passed the front row, he did not glance toward Lisa or the framed photograph still resting on the rail. His head remained lowered, steps mechanical, shoulders rounded under the weight of the words that had just been spoken. Margaret's family remained seated a moment longer. Lisa reached forward and lifted the photograph gently, pressing it against her chest. Her sister wrapped an arm around her shoulders. No one spoke. There were no dramatic outbursts, no shouts of victory or despair. Only the quiet release that comes when long-held breath is finally exhaled. Outside the heavy double doors, reporters waited in the hallway, cameras ready. Inside, the courtroom grew still. The monitors stood dark. The jury chairs remained empty. Judge Hargrove gathered her notes with the same deliberate care she had shown throughout, then rose and disappeared through the side door behind the bench. The machinery of justice had completed its turn. 25 years, a number that would follow Caleb for the rest of his life. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the now empty room, the faint echo of a single gavel strike lingered, like the closing note of a story no one had wanted to hear, yet one that demanded to be told. The heavy doors of the Duval County Courthouse closed behind the last departing spectator that February afternoon in 2025. Sunlight slanted low across the marble steps, casting long shadows that stretched toward the street. Inside, the courtroom stood empty once more. Evidence folders removed, monitors powered down, the frame photograph of Margaret Whitmore carried away in Lisa's careful hands. The gavel's echo had faded, but its meaning lingered in every corner of the building and far beyond. Margaret's bungalow in the Arlington district sold within months. A young couple with a toddler bought it, drawn to the quiet cul-de-sac and the mature oaks lining the street. They painted the kitchen a soft sage green, replaced the worn linoleum, planted new herbs in the raised beds Margaret had tended so faithfully. Neighbors waved from porches as moving trucks came and went, but conversations still drifted back to the night the sirens arrived. "She was the sweetest lady," one longtime resident said over coffee on a front stoop. "Always had peppermints for the kids. Never locked her door." The new owners never learned the full story until later. When they did, they quietly removed the last trace of the old kitchen drawer where the revolver had once been stored. Lisa and her sister sorted through their mother's belongings in the weeks that followed the sale. They kept the recipe cards, yellowed, edges soft from years of use, though neither could yet bring themselves to bake the peach cobbler. The peppermint jar went to a local women's shelter where children visiting with their mothers received the small candies with wide eyes and shy smiles. Margaret's garden tools found new homes among neighbors who promised to keep her tomatoes growing each summer. Small acts of preservation, quiet ways to honor a life interrupted. Caleb arrived at the reception and medical center in Lake Butler under gray skies. The intake process was efficient and impersonal. Strip search, issued clothing, orientation lectures delivered in flat monotones. He was classified as a youthful offender and placed in a specialized housing unit designed for inmates under 21, separate from the general population but still within the adult system. The cell was small, concrete, fluorescent lit. No reflective metal surfaces to practice expressions, but no audience to perform for. Only the steady rhythm of counts, meals delivered through slots, and the distant clang of steel doors. Early reports from correctional staff noted a marked change. The boy who had once joked about sentencing ranges and rehearsed smirks now kept to himself. He attended required classes, GED preparation, anger management, victim impact awareness, without resistance, but also without much visible engagement. During group sessions, he listened more than he spoke. Counselors described him as withdrawn, compliant, occasionally distant. Whether the quiet stemmed from genuine reflection or simply the exhaustion of isolation remained unclear. Psychological follow-ups occurred at regular intervals. The same court-appointed psychologist who had evaluated him pre-trial conducted the first post-sentencing assessment 6 months later. Caleb answered questions in short sentences. When asked about remorse, he said, I think about her sometimes. The kitchen, the way it smelled like cinnamon. He did not elaborate. When pressed about the kiss in court, he looked at the floor. I don't know why I did that. It felt funny then. It doesn't now. The report noted decreased grandiosity, reduced thrill-seeking language, but cautioned that true remorse could take years to surface, if it ever did. Outside the facility walls, the story continued to circulate. Courtroom clips, especially the kiss and the judge's final words, resurfaced periodically on social media and true crime forums. That judge didn't hold back, one commenter wrote. On 25 years at 14, brutal but fair. Others debated juvenile sentencing laws, brain science, redemption. Margaret's name appeared less often in headlines, but her photograph, smiling, holding tomatoes, remained the image most people remembered when they thought of the case. Lisa started a small scholarship fund in her mother's name through the local library system. Money for children to buy books, attend reading programs, the kind of quiet support Margaret had given for decades. Donations came steadily, many from strangers who had followed the trial and wanted to contribute something positive. Each spring, Lisa visited her mother's grave with fresh peach blossoms. She placed them gently against the headstone, spoke softly for a few minutes, then stood in silence watching the wind move through the cemetery trees. Caleb turned 16 inside the facility. No birthday celebration, no visitors beyond his attorney for status checks. His mother wrote letters he rarely answered. The world outside continued. New games released, new consoles launched, trends rose and fell. But none of it reached him. The backpack he once carried so heavily now sat forgotten in an evidence locker. The console he had wanted so desperately gathered dust somewhere in a relative's attic, never opened. Time moved differently behind those walls. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Routine became both punishment and structure. Classes, meals, rec time in a fenced yard under watchful eyes, lights out at 10. The absence of performance space forced something new, perhaps reflection, perhaps only survival. No one could say for certain. In the Arlington neighborhood, a wind chime still tinkled on porches during golden hour evenings. Sprinklers hissed across lawns. Children rode bikes until dusk. Life resumed its gentle rhythm, but with a quiet awareness that safety is fragile, trust is precious, and consequences, once set in motion, are patient and thorough. Margaret's name remained etched in stone at the cemetery. Caleb's name appeared in occasional Department of Corrections updates. 2 lives, one ended, one confined, linked forever by a single night in a quiet kitchen. Justice had been served, measured, and final. Yet in the stillness that followed, questions lingered like faint echoes. Had anything truly been learned? Could years behind concrete walls reshape a mind that once believed it stood above consequence? Or had the sentence simply removed the performer from the stage without changing the script inside his head? Only time, the long, slow kind measured in decades, would tell. And time, unlike youth, offers no immunity. The story that began with a single defiant kiss in a Jacksonville courtroom ended not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of consequence. What started as arrogance, lips pursed toward 12 strangers who held a boy's future, closed in the slow turning of years, where bravado could no longer outrun evidence, law, or time itself. Margaret Whitmore's grave rests beneath a modest granite marker in a peaceful cemetery on the edge of the city. Each spring, peach blossoms appear at its base, delicate pink petals placed by hands that still remember how she used to arrange them on Sunday tables. Lisa makes the drive every year on the anniversary, sometimes alone, sometimes with her sister or a grandchild who never met the woman whose name they carry in stories. They speak softly for a few minutes, then stand in silence watching the breeze move through the live oaks. No grand speeches, no tears that demand witness. just the gentle ritual of remembering someone who lived with open hands and an unlocked door. The house on the quiet cul-de-sac changed owners twice more after the first young family moved on. Each new resident painted over old colors, planted different flowers, hung different curtains. Yet neighbors still point to the side gate when telling the story to newcomers. That's where it happened, and the words carry the same weight they did in 2025. The peppermint jar that once sat by Margaret's front door now belongs to a community center across town. Children reach into it after story hour, small fingers closing around striped candies, never knowing the woman who once kept it full for exactly that reason. Caleb Whitmore turned 18 inside a state correctional facility 2 years after sentencing. By then, the orange jumpsuit had given way to standard-issue greens. The boy who once practiced smirks in reflective metal now moved through corridors with his head down and his voice low. Correctional records describe consistent compliance, no infractions, completion of every mandated program, steady participation in vocational courses that teach welding, basic electrical work, and computer repair. Whether the change reflects genuine introspection or simply adaptation to an environment that offers no stage remains a question only he could answer, and he has chosen silence on the subject. Letters from his mother arrive every few months. Most go unanswered. One correctional counselor noted in a progress report that Caleb keeps a single photograph tucked inside his locker, not of himself, not of friends, but of a kitchen counter with a half-rolled sheet of dough and a jar of cinnamon. He has never explained why he keeps it. When asked during a routine evaluation if he thinks about that night, he answered quietly, "Every day." No elaboration followed. Online, the courtroom clip still circulates. The moment Caleb blew the kiss to the jury has been viewed millions of times across platforms, shared, commented on, dissected. A Judge Hargrove's final words to him, "You mistook youth for immunity," appear in captions, quoted in discussions about juvenile justice, adolescent entitlement, the limits of second chances. The video resurfaces every year around the anniversary, sparking the same debates. Was 25 years too harsh for a 14-year-old? Was it the only language he would understand? Most who watched the full trial lean toward the latter. The smirk that once defined him now serves as a cautionary emblem. Arrogance meeting its mirror in cold steel cuffs and a judge's unblinking stare. Lisa's scholarship fund through the library system has grown steadily. It awards small grants each year to children who might otherwise go without books, reading programs, or quiet corners to escape into stories. The application form asks only one question beyond the basics. Tell us about someone who made you love reading. Many answers mention grandmothers, librarians, patient teachers. Margaret's name appears more than once, carried forward in the handwriting of strangers who learned her story through news clips and word of mouth. In the Arlington neighborhood, life continues its gentle cadence. Wind chimes catch the breeze. Sprinklers hiss across lawns at dusk. Children still ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. But there is a new awareness woven into the ordinary days, a reminder that trust, once broken, leaves echoes. Doors that used to stand ajar now click shut at night. Conversations about safety happen over fences where they once never needed to be spoken. Caleb will be 39 when he first becomes eligible for review. By then, the world will have turned many times. New technologies, new laws, new faces in old neighborhoods. Whether he emerges changed or merely older is a question time alone holds. What is certain is that the kiss meant to mock ended up immortalizing the moment authority answered back. The smirk that once felt invincible vanished beneath the weight of 25 years, measured in concrete walls, steel doors, and uninterrupted hours of reflection. Margaret's name remains etched in stone, surrounded each spring by peach blossoms. Caleb's name appears in periodic Department of Corrections updates, line items in a system that does not forget. Two paths diverged on a quiet October night in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon. One ended beneath blossoms. The other stretches forward through decades yet to be lived. The gavel fell. And this time, he didn't smile. Stories like this remind us that justice, when it arrives, often wears the face of inevitability. It does not shout. It does not rush. It simply waits until every layer of denial has been stripped away, until performance gives way to silence, until youth learns, at last, that consequence is the one opponent that never blinks. Thank you for watching. If this case moved you, if it made you think about trust, accountability, or the long reach of a single choice, leave your thoughts below. What would you have wanted the sentence to be? Could forgiveness ever find its way back into a story like this? Hit that like button if you believe justice was served, subscribe for more stories that remind us the truth always finds its way, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe out there.